On this episode of the show, I have with me Simone Kalmakis. She is the VP of Engineering at Viam. We're going to be talking about managing and leading hardware and software teams. So Simone's job and responsibility is leading both those teams, and we're going to talk to her about how she does that. She has a software background, ML specialization, and we're going to talk about the adjustments in incorporating that hardware side and just managing those different types of skill sets and kind of what she sees in some of the challenges and some of the opportunities and all those things in between. Simone, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. All right. Before we start, can you tell us what the company does?
Absolutely. So Viam is a software platform in the robotics space that's bridging the gap between physical devices and AI. So lots of companies struggle to make use of their physical devices. There's a huge gap between the software world and the hardware world. And Viam is a platform bridging that gap so that people can easily develop on top of this platform and bring intelligence to the devices in the real world.
And I guess, your background we'll kind of get into, but, you are responsible for managing hardware and software. And maybe before we dive into that, we will talk about your background. So you came through obviously from the software side, a lot of machine learning as well. As you kind of have gone through that journey of leading those type teams, and you've incorporated now obviously hardware. What have you seen different? What have you seen that you've had to adjust, maybe, if anything, your own approach to managing and leading?
Yeah, I think it's very humbling leading folks from a background that I have very little experience in. So some of the people who are in my org now reporting to me have PhDs in mechanical engineering and robotics, and it's super exciting. And I'm very fascinated by all of it. That their expertise vastly outweighs my own. So I think it's healthy to come into it with a low ego and a lot of curiosity.
Absolutely. So I guess, you yourself, coming from that software side, being comfortable with code, when you think about managing and leading that hardware component, obviously overseeing both, I can see their synergies. Obviously, you do have dependencies as well. Obviously, what you described to the company, they're doing, innovative things in the space where hardware is important. And it's not just a SaaS product where, you get the code to work, you guys can find the features and go. That relationship, that dependency, I guess the obvious question would be is on the software side, what does that dynamic look like? Is in that relationship to the hardware team in terms of the partnership itself?
Yeah, so we try to integrate the disciplines. So it's all just one engineering team that's combined. So on a given team focused on, something like motion planning, for example, you'll have folks who are coming from a mechanical engineering background, folks coming from a software engineering background. And my job is to make sure that the two can work together as symbiotically as possible, that the end result benefits from both backgrounds.
Do you see, I guess, through that process, you guys are building robotic components, hardware, that seems a lot more, I don't want to use the word scientific because obviously I think coding does have science to it, but there's a lot of experimentation. And I guess because of that, is the dynamic of managing the hardware component a little bit different? Is that something that comes up? Is that something that you notice?
Yeah, absolutely. There is, right. As you're saying, like there's the scientific method at work in a very physical way. Yeah, we'll make these software changes, but we need to physically test them out. I'm used to running unit tests and integration tests and all the rest, but front end tests, everything, but having the end test be, does this arm move in ways we expect? What does the material removal on a surface look like? Like this is all new to me. So yes, the testing process looks very different in particular. A lot of hardware testing. And one thing I've learned, which will come as no surprise to folks more comfortable with hardware, is that even the slightest change can have huge ramifications and it's hard to debug. I remember there was a pouring demo we did recently. So pouring a glass of wine or glass of water. It was actually pretty cool. It was one robotic arm grabs the bottle, the other robotic arm grabs the glass, they pour, they work together beautifully. It was a pretty wow demo, and you get a glass of wine at the end. So that was pretty cool. And one thing we found was we had mounted, so we had two of these setups, two carts with each with two arms. We had mounted the arms slightly differently from one cart to the next. And then we were having trouble with the point cloud where we were trying to recognize exactly where the glass was in space. We had all sorts of theories. Oh, we added this white contact paper at the end to make it look nice for the user. Maybe that was causing reflections and artifacts off of it. Turns out, no, it was none of that. We forgot. We had mounted them slightly differently. So they had slightly different angles. So when we were doing the math to, mesh the point clouds together, it was a bit off. In space. And we had, finding that out is not a trivial process. So, whereas code, you can, unit test the heck out of, it can be quite different in the hardware world.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty cool example. And I guess I've never worked with, when I wrote code, I never had that hardware aspect. So part of my mind goes into what you described. Like I need to, we're a team, but I really have to hope they come up with these breakthroughs, because my code really needs their hardware. And then I don't know how far I could go without more of their hardware development, because as you just said, just slight nuances. And maybe that's something, I don't know if everyone has had the opportunity to partner with the hardware side if you're a software engineer, but with that nuance of that dependency, what does the process look different from software engineering in terms of how far you can get ahead and not worry that something on the hardware side might or might not work, or you might need to go back and make some adjustments? I know we talked about dependencies, but if I'm a software engineer, I know I'm not sitting on my hands. That's not what I'm saying. But there is that component of they have to be at a certain threshold before I'd even want to write code.
Yeah, no, it's true. You need to be testing out very iteratively as a core part of the development process. So a grave mistake would be to go write a bunch of software, merge it all in, and then say, hey, can someone test this? These 20 changes all together. We try to avoid that. So yeah, we absolutely have to have hardware testing as an integral part of the development process, recognizing that how you expect the code to work may be quite different. There's so many steps between that and, the end result. So definitely has to be integrated in.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the follow-up question, maybe the real question there, was the roadmaps. Obviously it's one team, they partner. Do the individual teams then have slight nuances in terms of the roadmaps they follow because of this lag in hardware development, hardware testing, and moving it to a point at which the software team can work with it?
So we actually don't differentiate between a software team and a hardware team. To be clear, everybody is considered a software engineer, just coming from different backgrounds and different expertises. And Viam ultimately is a software platform. So the hardware expertise is so helpful because we both build a platform and then also, secondly, develop solutions on top of our own platform that can be specific to a given vertical. Say marine is a big vertical for us. Industrial automation is a big vertical for us. Arenas is a big vertical for us. So within these verticals, we develop on top of our own platform. And that's where the hardware experience is extremely helpful. And we're testing things out in production. And obviously, as we're building the platform, we're also needing to test things out in the hardware in the real world. But yeah, they're all one team. So different teams under me will have different levels of focus. For example, my data team, nobody with a mechanical engineering background. My machine learning team, a little bit, but not much. Versus like my motion team, very focused on arms. My motion execution team focused on the low level drivers, things like that. But all one software team.
Being all one software team, for you, how does it change your management approach? Because you do have various types of skills. You have various types of, quote unquote engineers. I know they're all, one team, one software engineering unit, but does that change anything, or does that affect how you lead or manage or anything in that vein?
It does. When I think about things like the career ladder, and I rewrote Viam's career ladder a year ago. And one thing I had to really keep top of mind was what is the right rubric on which to evaluate folks coming from different backgrounds that's going to appreciate and reward the various expertises that we lean on. Also things like collaboration models between the engineers and between teams and who were lending out on which project. All of that is important to keep people's individual bents in mind.
I guess from your personal journey, obviously you get this opportunity to manage a fairly different type of software engineering team with different types of skill sets. When you kind of look back at, the other places you've been and, more traditional, maybe software, ML type basis, from your perspective, and I guess if you had advice if somebody, because we are seeing a lot more software hardware combining with robotics and AI. I mean, it's becoming more common. Is there something that you would have prepared yourself differently in moving into this type of role, or is it one of those things where, while it might be in theory sounding like a fantastic idea of preparation, you got to really be in it to understand it?
Yeah, definitely being in it is probably the most helpful thing. But the biggest prep I think would have helped is just to do a bunch of hobbyist projects, because that's what I did when I started. And that was super helpful. Our founder and CEO, Elliot Horowitz, former co-founder of MongoDB, he advised me when I first started, start doing what we call 20% projects. Probably a lot of people are familiar with that concept, originally from Google, of 80% of your job, do your day job, 20% of your time, do a project that is your idea. And in Viam's case, it's so important to do these projects building on top of the Viam platform so that we're in the shoes of our users. We're finding out bugs. We're getting a good sense, of where the product needs to grow. So when I started at Viam, I immediately started with 20% projects. And that was great advice from Elliot, because then, first of all, it helped me ramp up so much and understand the space better. But secondly, as a new hire, I was more in the shoes of a user coming into the platform than I ever was ever since and will be. Now I have so much history and context about how Viam works, but as a new hire, you don't. So that's actually a really valuable way to add value from the start. So yeah, doing 20% projects is great. My very first 20% project was, I created a smart device that would recognize my kids' stuffed animals. So I have 3 kids. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old baby who didn't exist at that time. And stuffed animals, it turns out, are great for a computer vision algorithm because they're brightly colored. They have large eyes, big features, easily distinguishable. So all the reasons that make them great for kids, a computer vision algorithm also loves. So it would recognize my kids' stuffed animals. It would talk to them using a pre-recorded MP3 that I had, recorded. And all of a sudden it was magic for them. Their stuffed animals were conversing with them.
That's pretty cool. Wow, that's an interesting take on giving your children a unique experience. So that's a cool story.
They had a lot of feature requests after that. I'm still working through the backlog.
It's going to be funny when people hear you might get some requests going, hey, by the way, if you actually can figure that out, I might take one. I guess, as we've been talking, this notion, you have one single team, they're specialized software engineers. You guys are building on, as a platform on top of hardware, which all makes sense. And I am kind of curious, when you go into like a one-on-one and you do have, different career ladders, you have different technical ladders you're dealing with. Do you keep your one-on-ones fairly consistent? I mean, obviously those touch points are pretty standard, but obviously having different types of problems and different types of challenges per, engineering discipline might come up. I was just kind of curious if that's something that even is a thing for you.
They are different. I mean, I personally go into all of them with a similar mindset of my leadership style is, servant leadership. I am here to support you. I am here to help you and your team function the best it can. I am here as a point of alignment and help. So that's always my mindset going in. I rely on my direct reports to drive the agenda for what's most helpful for them. But where they take that agenda can vary greatly, as to your point. So from, the folks with more of a mechanical robotics background, I hear a lot of the software engineers don't think this is a hard problem and they're underestimating the space and the complexity involved and they're going to be sorely disappointed. So it's a lot more of alignment issues like that. And, from the software engineers, I hear well, all sorts of things, but not that. That's probably a more consistent theme that is reserved for the folks coming from a robotics background of, hey, these software engineers are coming in, they have no idea what they're getting themselves into, kind of issues.
That's actually pretty funny. I guess from the perspective of if we look back 5 years ago, robotics. I mean, it's been an industry for decades. I mean, it's been around, but the attention it's gotten, coupled with AI, has been tremendous in the last 24 months. I haven't seen this many, robotics companies funded to try to solve various different problems. When you are looking at that dynamic, and I guess maybe this is going to be a little bit more of a hiring question, and you're in a space where these are very specific skills that everybody wants. How do you collaborate, I guess, touch point with talent to make sure you guys are retaining talent in the best way you can? Because also replacing this type of talent is a challenge as well. But I was just kind of curious that, what have you seen? What do you do proactively to make sure, if something isn't right, you can address it? I know there's one-on-ones you alluded to, but just kind of curious what you're seeing.
Yeah, well, first of all, it really helps us on the recruiting side. And I would say on the retention side. For us, it's more of a benefit than a disadvantage, because everybody, who doesn't want to work on the hot fields, as you said, of robotics, AI, the intersection of the two, we get a lot of interest that way. So that I see that as very helpful to us. And I've seen that play out. Yeah, sometimes we do have to compete with other companies in the space, or we'll lose talent to them, and that hurts. But overall, I've definitely seen it as a more of a tailwind than a headwind.
And I guess when you do go to market and your team, as you described it, when you do talk to engineers and you obviously paint the picture of what the company does, you're coming onto a team with specialized engineers. Is there an opportunity? Because I think some of these skills, I mean, you mentioned motion and you mentioned some of those dynamics in robotics from a software perspective. Those are very nuanced roles. Like, I think when you're on that team, you either have that skill set. Sometimes you need that PhD. You really can't move into some of those roles. When you do have people come on and they do talk about mobility, is there opportunities? And this is not even about you guys, but just kind of the technical skill set. Is there opportunities to move into some of those areas that traditionally, require PhDs, require some of that research, or, maybe other functions outside of research? Because I know a lot of people are trying to get into the space. And sometimes when you do read the job descriptions, that PhD does seem like a bit of an obstacle, a bit of a barrier, but there are other roles that you could probably contribute to.
I absolutely think that someone who's smart and motivated and has relevant experience can excel. I absolutely do. I don't see it as a barrier. I know some folks with those PhDs might disagree with me, but yes, I think that a great software engineer who's coming into it with ability to think through complex, especially spatial reasoning, algorithmic reasoning, attention to detail, the ability to hold a complex algorithm in your mind, like that's going to be helpful here, regardless of your PhD or not. The domain experience, I feel, is very learnable. And I know that's a simplification, but I've seen those people do quite well.
Yeah, it is interesting because I think some of the requirements, and we work on them here and there for robotics companies, and it's either super specific and narrow in terms of the skill set, or it is I need somebody smart to go do X. That's definitely something I feel we've seen. And again, at a startup level, I think it's a little bit more challenged because you can't sometimes wait for people to ramp up. So that's a slightly different dynamic to deal with. And maybe last question for you is when you look at your role and when you're looking at your leadership style and skill and all the things that you had coming into Viam, and you've been there about 2 years. Do you see the changes in yourself? Obviously, managing this, slightly different type of software engineering team. Is it something that you notice, or once you're in the seat, being a leader is a leader?
No, I definitely do notice it. I mean, first of all, I just ordered a robotic arm for my home office this morning, so look at me, come such a long way. I definitely notice it. I mean, I actually studied math in school. So for me, it's been a huge pleasure to learn about. I find it fascinating. It's actually been more relevant to my, education than some other topics I've worked in. So I think it's been so fun. But yeah, I definitely see myself coming into it with, again, I try not to presume what I don't know. Like I try to know what I don't know, basically, and playing that role of alignment, whether it's bringing together software engineers and mechanical engineers or folks who are in the space and not, like a lot of alignment has been very forefront for me in the way that it hasn't always needed to in previous roles. So for example, when I was an engineering director at Flatiron Health, where I worked for 6 years, I was surrounded by software engineers. Most of us had, more of a data background than anything. And everybody was quite aligned already. So the alignment piece wasn't really at the forefront. It was, a lot of other skills were needed more. But here it is a lot of let's all get on the same page about things. Let's all make sure we're speaking the same language and swimming in the right direction. That is something I lean on day to day.
Yeah, it's really cool when I listen to you talk about your role. Obviously, you have the background in math. Build something for your kids. You order a robotic arm for your home. You've embraced it, but you're also. I was speaking to a CEO. We're going to do a topic for the show about work-life balance. He brought up a great point, and he said, work-life balance sometimes is discussed because people do things they're just unhappy at. They're not happy with the work, so they try to balance the fact that they have a disconnection to their work with something else in their life to balance it. And he said, well, what if we pursue things we're passionate about more often? I'm listening to you and I'm like, wow, it sounds like, this is a great precursor to what that episode will be, because there is this passion. I mean, you just mentioned you have a couple of young children who I'm sure require a lot of attention.
Yeah, a little bit.
You're a VP of engineering. You're a VP of engineering.
I just have free time and sleep in and go to brunch.
Yeah, exactly. You got a lot of extra. And then, I hear she's buying a robotics arm that you'll probably do something to help, pour milk or something. I'm just joking with that one. But I can see that the work-life balance, even though you have a lot of responsibility in both domains, there's a very obvious enjoyment in what you're doing that brings that balance. And again, this is a side question I didn't plan to ask you. You mentioned it, it triggered my thought on that. But I think that is lacking. And I think you embodied that. And I wish more people could find and embrace that component in their lives, because I think it does help. And I'm sure you have some thoughts on that, but I just want to leave that there.
No, I totally agree with you. There's a huge difference between working, and we've all had this, working at a job that feels like pulling teeth out hour after hour and how draining that is, versus working at a job that is enjoyable and you're interested to learn about. And it can be stressful and it can be intense. I've been working in startups for the last 15 years. I have yet to find one that hasn't felt stressful and intense, but maybe that's okay because you believe in the mission. Viam has a vision. Part of why I joined is the ambition of Viam's vision. Make every device a smart device. The entire world could, benefit from this. Like imagine the surface area. So just a huge vision that you're passionate about building towards, a long-term one to build. I think that's so important because I think you're absolutely right. Like the amount that you need to balance of how much it takes out from you varies based on that. I would say in my experience, more than the actual hours you're putting in. I think it's more about how do you feel at the end of the day though? Are you excited to come into work in the morning?
Very cool. Very cool. Simone, I want to thank you. I know you obviously have to get back to a lot of stuff that we just talked about.
Yeah, I got to build that vision.
I want to thank you. There you go. You were gracious in giving us your insights. And if somebody does have a question, probably more around the technical aspects of managing this type of software engineering team, is there a good way of connecting with you to follow up?
I would say the best is on LinkedIn. Simone Kalmakis. On LinkedIn is the best way to reach me.
Okay, perfect. We'll make sure people are aware of that. And again, thanks for being on. Fantastic discussion with you. And that's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I don't think everyone gets the opportunity to work with, type of engineers that Simone does. And also, as we found out late, Simone loves what she's doing, which really does, we just touched on that, work-life balance, which I think is fantastic. And share this episode with somebody else who could benefit from hearing about not just the leadership component, but some of that work-life balance that we've been talking about throughout. And I'd really appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.